What kind of man buys a woman like livestock? And what kind of woman stares back at him with eyes that refuse to break? The Texas sun burned hot over the market yard of Redemption Creek as the monthly livestock auction roared on. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and the smell of horses. Cowboys yelled over one another, traders argued about prices, and cattle kicked up red dirt that clung to everything. Jonathan Hale moved through the chaos like a man used to long days and quiet thoughts. At 35, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the stillness of someone who had seen enough storms to know they always passed. His old war wound ached in the heat, but he ignored it as he studied the horses penned around him. He had come only for one thing, a good mare to replace the old horse he lost last winter. But as he walked farther through the dusty yards, something made him stop. A crowd had formed near the far corner of the market, not the usual kind that gathered around a fine stallion. This was different. The air felt wrong, tight, like people were watching a thing they knew they shouldn't. Jonathan stepped closer. Samuel McKenna stood there, the trader everyone knew to avoid. He was the kind of man who sold anything if the price was right. And standing beside him, with a rope tied around her wrists, was a young woman. The girl looked about 19. Her hair hung tangled around her face. Dirt and bruises marked her skin. But her eyes, they were deep brown and sharp, like she was taking in every detail, even though her chin stayed lowered. "She's strong enough for household work," McKenna barked. "Can't hear, don't speak, but she'll cook, clean, and stay out of a man's way, perfect for peace and quiet." The men around him laughed. Jonathan didn't. He felt something cold twist in his gut as McKenna grabbed the girl's arm and yanked her forward. She stumbled but didn't cry out. She didn't even flinch. Her fingers tightened only once on the rope, a small, quiet act of strength. "She got a name?" someone asked. Clara rose. McKenna said, "Her own daddy brought her to me. Said she ain't worth nothing, deaf, mute. Trouble since her mama died. I'm selling her for $50, same price as a pack mule." Jonathan's jaw went tight. The way the men looked at her made him sick. Like she was an object, not a person. Like her bruises didn't matter. Like her eyes weren't full of a fire McKenna either didn't notice or didn't care about. Benjamin Crawford stepped forward. "I'll take her. Need extra hands on my ranch." Jonathan knew Crawford. The man overworked his cattle, let alone a girl who couldn't speak. Clara lifted her head then. Just a second. Her eyes met Jonathan's, and in that single moment, he saw something. Fear, yes, but also stubbornness, wild strength, and a spark that reminded him of the mustangs that ran free in the canyons. Unbroken, fighting to survive. Before he could think twice, Jonathan heard his own voice cut through the market noise. "I'll take her." The crowd went silent. Even McKenna blinked. "Well now," the trader grinned. "Didn't figure you for the type. $50 cash. No returns." Quote, Jonathan pulled out the money he'd saved for a new mare. It was almost everything he had. He pressed it into McKenna's greedy hands. And the man shoved Clara Rose toward him so hard she fell to her knees. Jonathan stepped forward and cut the rope from her wrists. She stared up at him, breathing fast, waiting for whatever came next. "Can you walk?" he asked, out of habit, then cursed himself. If she couldn't hear him, what was the point of asking? But she looked up, read his lips, and nodded once. Quiet, strong, controlled. Jonathan turned and walked toward his wagon. After a moment, he sensed her footsteps behind him, light and careful. She moved like someone trained to survive in silence. He helped her climb into the wagon, pointing to where she could sit. She understood right away and settled herself with her knees pulled close, eyes watchful but calm. Jonathan felt strange, like he'd made a decision that wasn't entirely his, like fate had nudged him in a direction he didn't yet understand. He took the reins and started the horses forward, away from the market, away from the cruel eyes of the men who'd laughed. As they rolled out of Redemption Creek, he saw their reflection in a store window, a lone cowboy, a silent girl beside him, a road stretching into the wild Texas land. He didn't know her story, didn't know why she'd been beaten, didn't know what she'd been through, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing about Clara Rose was as simple as McKenna claimed. Something about her, her quiet strength, her steady eyes, made him feel like the world had shifted under his boots. And as the wagon carried them into the open country, storm clouds building on the horizon, Jonathan Hale realized this girl might bring more change into his life than any wild horse ever could. What kind of storm warns a man before it hits, and what kind of girl knows the land better than someone who's lived on it his whole life? Jonathan kept the wagon moving along the dusty trail as the sun dipped low behind the hills. The air turned heavy, thick, and strange. His horses, Thunder and Lightning, grew restless. Their ears twitched. Their steps grew uneven. Something was coming. Behind him, Clara Rose sat quietly, her knees pulled to her chest. But she wasn't scared. Her dark eyes watched the horizon like she could read the wind itself. Jonathan kept glancing back at her. He didn't know why. Maybe to check if she was all right. Maybe because she had a way of looking straight through him without ever saying a word. 2 hours into their journey, the world went still. Too still. The air held its breath. Thunder shook his head hard. Lightning stomped. "Easy, boys," Jonathan murmured, but his gut tightened. He knew this feeling. Sandstorm. He scanned the land, searching for shelter. There were hills to the east, but far. Too far for the wagon to reach in time. Then, a sudden tug on his sleeve, he turned sharply. Clara Rose had moved to the front of the wagon, her eyes wide, her hand gripping his shirt with surprising strength. She pointed southwest, hard, urgent. "There's nothing out there," he said, forgetting again she couldn't hear, but she understood his lips, and she shook her head fiercely. Then she pointed again. Faster. Sharper. Jonathan hesitated. Trusting strangers wasn't something he'd ever done easily. But the wind picked up again, swirling little devils of dust around the wagon wheels. Clara shifted her hands, making a sign Jonathan didn't know, but her face said everything. "Trust me." Against every instinct in his body, Jonathan snapped the reins and turned the wagon southwest. The wind roared behind them like a beast breaking free. Clara climbed beside him, her fingers gripping the seat as the storm chased them. She kept pointing, guiding him as if she'd walked the land 100 times. Then Jonathan saw it, a dark split in the earth, almost invisible until you were nearly on top of it. A hidden canyon. He steered the horses down the steep, rocky path. Dust filled the air. Wind screamed overhead. But inside the canyon, the noise softened. The stone walls protected them like cupped hands. 50 feet in, they found a wide space under a stone overhang. Safe, strong, hidden. Jonathan pulled the horses to a stop, jumped down, and fought to calm them. Their sides trembled with fear, but they trusted his voice. Clara was already gathering whatever might blow away, moving fast and sure. Together they tied the horses and covered the supplies just as the storm hit. The world above them exploded in a howl of sand and wind. Dust rained down in clouds. The sky turned into a brown wall of fury. Jonathan pulled his bandana over his mouth. Then he saw Clara Rose with nothing to shield herself. Without thinking, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her head and shoulders. She froze for a moment, surprised. Then she looked up at him through the dust, and for a heartbeat, they were close. Too close. Close enough for him to see gold flecks in her brown eyes, and the way her lashes shook from the storm's roar. The storm raged on. The wind screamed overhead. Dust seeped in, coating their hair, their hands, their clothes. Jonathan pulled her close to the canyon wall, shielding her small frame with his body. She didn't fight him, didn't flinch, but he felt her tremble, not from fear, from something else, something quiet, something she wasn't used to. Safety. She huddled against him, her head near his chest, and Jonathan felt the storm inside himself. One he hadn't expected, one he didn't know how to control. When the storm finally eased, the world around them lay still and red with dust. Jonathan stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been. Clara lowered her eyes, but not from shame, more like she was thinking deeply about something she couldn't say. He checked the horses. They were shaken, but safe. Thanks to her. Only because of her. How had she known about the canyon? He glanced back. Clara Rose was touching the canyon floor with her fingertips, her eyes half closed like she was listening through the ground. He watched quietly. She stood and returned to him while brushing dust from her face. Jonathan pointed to himself. "Jonathan!" Then pointed to her. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she mouthed, slow and clear. "Clara." He felt the name settle into him like a stone dropped into still water. "Can you read lips?" he asked. She nodded. He pointed to her throat and ears, asking without words. With steady hands, she tapped her ears, then her throat, then shook her head. But then she surprised him. She knelt and placed her hand on the ground again, eyes closed. Suddenly, she pointed toward the horses and held up 2 fingers. Jonathan frowned. Then thunder's hoof struck stone. Lightning snorted. 2 movements. "You felt that?" he asked. She opened her eyes and smiled softly, touching her ears, then the ground, then her heart. Not deaf, not silent, just different. The fire they built later glowed warm against the canyon walls. They shared beans and hard bread in the quiet. She helped him set camp without being asked, moving like she'd done this her whole life. When he pointed to his bedroll for her, she shook her head and motioned for him to take it. He refused. She pushed it back. He pushed it forward again. Finally, he draped it over her shoulders, gentle but firm. Her eyes softened. Just before she lay down, she placed a hand on her heart, then extended it toward him. "Thank you." Jonathan lay awake long after she slept, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing, staring into the glowing coals. He'd come looking for a mare. Instead, he'd found a girl who wasn't broken, wasn't helpless, wasn't anything McKenna had said. She was something else entirely, something stronger, something mysterious, something that could change a man's whole world. And tomorrow, they would reach his ranch. What happens when a man brings home a stranger and discovers she was never meant to be a stranger at all? The next morning, the world outside the canyon was washed clean. The storm had passed, leaving the sky pale blue and the air sharp. Jonathan packed the wagon while Clara Rose brushed dust from her dress, her fingers moving quickly, practiced. She had slept curled in the bedroll, soft breaths, steady, peaceful. Jonathan hadn't slept much at all. He kept replaying her humming, the sound he wasn't supposed to have heard, a sound she had tried so hard to hide. He didn't understand it. But he felt it. They climbed back onto the wagon seat, and the horses pulled them toward the Double H Ranch. As the sun rose higher, Clara sat beside him, reading the land with her eyes, her hands resting in her lap. Quiet. Steady. When his ranch finally appeared, the small adobe house, the corral, the old barn leaning a little to the east, Jonathan felt that same mix of pride and loneliness he always did. But today, loneliness felt different, smaller, lighter. He glanced at Clara. She sat straighter, studying everything with wide eyes. As soon as the wagon stopped, she stepped down and walked straight to the corral. Liberty, his bay mare, lifted her head, ears pricked forward. Clara placed her hand on the fence. Liberty walked right to her, nose touching Clara's palm like they had known each other for years. Jonathan blinked. Liberty hated strangers. Clara closed her eyes and placed her hand flat on the mare's neck. After a moment, she turned and pointed to Liberty's right front leg. "Hurt." Jonathan frowned. "Wasn't hurt when I left." Quote. But he checked anyway. Heat, swelling. "How did you know that?" he asked softly. Clara only looked at him with those deep brown eyes and then walked to the barn, already searching the shelves for liniment and bandages. She knew what to use. She knew exactly how to wrap the leg. Her hands were gentle, certain, as if healing was part of her nature. Jonathan watched with growing amazement. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't broken. She was gifted. Over the next days, Clara Rose fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn, moving through the ranch like she had always lived there. Chickens quieted at her touch. Barn cats curled in her lap. Horses followed her like shadows. She didn't speak, but she spoke. With her hands. With her eyes. With her presence. Jonathan found himself learning her signs, small ones at first. Water. Food. Danger. Thank you. He learned the way her shoulders tilted when she was happy. The way her fingers twitched when she worried. The way she hummed only when she thought he wasn't near. One evening, Jonathan walked quietly toward the barn and froze at the doorway. Clara Rose was brushing Liberty, humming that soft, strange melody. The horse stood completely still, eyes half closed in pure peace. Jonathan stepped closer. "I thought you couldn't speak," he said gently. Clara spun around, startled, dropping the brush. Fear flashed across her face. She touched her throat, shook her head hard, as if begging him not to think she had lied. "No," he said quickly, raising his hands. "I'm not angry. I just heard you." She looked away, ashamed. For the first time, Jonathan saw what she hid. The scars on her throat, thin, pale lines that told a story she could not. He stepped closer. "Clara, who hurt you?" She shook her head and climbed up to the hayloft, curling into herself like a frightened animal. Jonathan sat below her, elbows on his knees. "This place is safe," he said slowly. "You're safe here." He didn't know if she could believe that, but she heard the truth in his voice. He saw it in the way her shoulders softened. The next morning she was back at work, quiet but steady. Weeks passed, then months, and something grew between them. Something neither spoke about, but both felt. Until the day Jonathan took her to Redemption Creek for supplies. He returned to find her trapped against the churchyard fence, a crowd shouting, accusing, pointing. "Witch," someone muttered, "not natural." "She touched my sick boy," Martha Edison yelled. "He got better too fast." "She made the dogs act strange." "She knows things no one told her." Jonathan pushed through the crowd. Clara stood small but proud, her chin lifted. She didn't tremble, didn't cry. He reached her side. Enough. But fear is a wildfire. One spark, and it catches. The crowd surged. Then something happened no one expected. Every horse in town reared at the same time, in the street, at the hitching posts, inside the livery stable. People screamed and scattered. Clara grabbed Jonathan's hand. He didn't hesitate. They ran. They didn't stop until they reached the ranch. Clara fled into the barn, and Jonathan followed. He found her holding Liberty, shaking from the fear she had hidden. She signed with trembling hands. "They fear me. They will hurt you because of me. I should leave." "No," Jonathan said. "You stay. Whatever happens, you stay." But he wasn't prepared for what came next. Riders began appearing at the ridge above the ranch, watching, threatening, more each day. 2. 5. 9. One cold November night, the barn burned. Someone had set it on fire. Jonathan and Clara fought the flames, saving the horses, but losing half the building. In the ashes, they found the message. "Send away the witch, O.R. Burn with her." Clara looked at him, tears shining. "I must leave." "No," Jonathan said. "I won't let anything take you away. Not fear, not fire, not them." Her hands moved slowly. "I care for you, too much. I can't lose you." Jonathan stepped closer. "Then stay." But before she could answer, they heard horses. Lots of horses. Jonathan grabbed his rifle and stood between Clara and the sound. But the riders who arrived weren't there to harm them. Dr. Hamilton came first, followed by Sarah Nightingale, Miguel Cervantes, Old Joseph. 15 people in total. People Clara had healed. People she had helped. "We're here to stand with you," Dr. Hamilton said. Clara covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Jonathan felt something shift in the air. Hope where fear had lived. That night changed everything. They rebuilt the barn. They protected her. They accepted her. Jonathan and Clara stood on the porch under the moonlight when he whispered the words he'd held inside for too long. "Sweetheart, you're stronger than a Mustang." She couldn't hear the sound, but she felt it. She stepped closer, placed her hand on his chest, then took his hand and placed it on her heart. And then, with a courage that shook him to his core, she kissed him, not with fear, not with confusion, but with choice, the kind that changes a man's whole life, the kind that marks the beginning of a new one.